Okay, so hello everybody. We need to do one thing on the screen here. So you'll see the strapline protecting people, nature, and our future. All of that comes into this discussion of today around food resilience. How do we protect our people? How do we protect our environment? And how do we protect our future? And food resilience is clearly one of those. I've just used a few images there of just some recent flooding events around the islands, just to bring home to you some of the issues that we face. So let's go into the presentation then. So next slide, please. So it's community means everyone, and by that I mean leaving no one behind. And I'll explain who some of these people might be in a bit more detail now. So next slide, please. Now, I hope you can forgive me personalising this. You know, when you shouldn't really personalise stuff, but I'm going to make it deeply personal because that was my dad. I say was because he died just before Christmas, and that was Melinda and I going to see him. Forgive me, I need to just do something with the camera here. Sorry, the camera decided to go off. So that was my dad, Tom, and Tom was 92 when he died. And the last few years of his life were very difficult. And he lived on his own because my mum died 10 years before. And for the last couple of years, he needed carers actually living in the house with him. But the food that he got came from places like Tesco's, or it came from some of these national care companies that provide little ready meals. And I can tell you now, one of the things that happened to him was very often there wasn't enough nutrition in the meals that he had. So he would ask for things like, oh, I'd like a cake, or I'd like something, you know, full of sugars and salts, because he thought he needed something else. The problem with that is the type of stuff he got broke up. And because he was bedridden, he would breathe it into his lungs. He'd then get an infection, and then he'd be wheeled off to hospital. And that was his life for the last couple of years, where he was backwards and forwards. And all of it, inextricably, was linked to food. And what nutrition he had, what food he had, and how he was supported in his life. Next slide, please. So next, thank you. And one of the things that we have to face as a community is that we have an aging population in the islands. We also know, and I'm going to show some slides that again reflect my dad, although he died in hospital in the end because he was wheeled away. But on this slide on the right, you'll see a chart there that shows 88%. That's the number of people who have their end of life in Western Isles. And many of those, if not all of those, will have pre-prepared food taken to them, often by carers who have 10 minutes. They come in, they beep the phone, they ping something in the microwave, put it in front of them, and then off they go again. And obviously they'll have family members if they're lucky. Some folk won't have family members in the islands. And one of the biggest pain that I suffered was the fact that I was 700 miles away from my dad. But, you know, and there will be people here who have relatives in Canada and America, you know, who went cousins from the Metagamma. You know, there's that sort of thing. So the point is, already the social work people are understanding that they may need to centralise some more of the services. Well, why not food? Why not food being part of that? Next slide, please. And for those of us who think about how the population is aging, around the island chain, there's only two areas where there's a younger population, and that's basically the Broad Bay area and Barra. But rural communities, if you look at Lewis and Harris, for example, or Lewis, for example, rural Lewis, there's going to be 32% more people over 65 in the next 20 years in that local community. Harris already has the oldest population, and that's why the population rise is not so dramatic. Please go on to the next slide. And then you start looking about people, how many people live on their own? Like Tom, my dad, exactly. Hands are going up in the room here. I'm sure there's plenty of folk around online as well. And if you look at that chart, towards the right of the chart, the age group goes up, and the numbers of percentages of people within that age group above the line are basically that's the all ages, but above the line, nearly all of them are in that older group. So it's older people living on their own in rural areas, predominantly in the Outer Hebrides. Those same rural areas are crofting communities. So for goodness sake, let's try and do something about this. And we know, because these are the numbers that the statisticians at the Health Board have worked on, that the figure's going to rise by another 3%, reaching 26% of the adult population by 2043. So 1 in 4 homes within the next 20 years will be single households. Please go on to the next slide. What does that mean for those people who are over 75? Well, we know that the biggest rise in people on their own is over 75s, predominantly women. And we know that we're going to get another 665 single person households over 75 in the coming period. So that's one just specific group of people that will have dietary and nutrition needs that will make their life and health and well-being significantly better. And there's something, if we're going to focus on one thing, that could be it. But personally, I think we should go wider than that, but I wanted to show you these numbers. Next slide, please. So we also have people who use food banks. And that's a rising number. And many people are involved in church groups that offer food banks themselves, or other community groups that offer food banks. And that number's only going up. And goodness knows what that's going to be like at the moment with the rise of heating oil as well. So we have to understand that there's this underlying group of people that could also benefit if you did the food production well, and in a way that meant that there was a surplus that could go for free to people in need. And then you've got that other group of people who are on their own, who are over 75, many of whom have got modest pensions themselves, who could pay for a ready meal to be sent to them that was highly nutritious. But there's some folk that can't pay. So let's get those factor those into the equation as well. Next slide, please. I'm conscious of time. So threats to our community. I'm going to bounce through some of the climate change threats. I've talked to you about the age, the demographic changes. I'm going to talk very quickly about some of the climate threats. Sarah had already talked about these earlier, but I'll just bang through them. Please, next slide. So we know that the future climate changes. This is from the Met Office. So we've worked through the Community Planning Partnership with the Met Office, who have provided us data on things like rainfall and the changes to temperature and so on. So we know that things are coming. We know that we're going to get more rain. We're going to get more wind and so on. I'll come on to wind in a second, but temperatures are changing already. We kind of know that. Please, next slide. But what we do know now is by the 2050s, can you move the mouse that just away from the, oh, okay, that must have been when I screenshotted it. That's my fault, so sorry. That's me being inefficient. That's 2080, that second, please, yeah. So that's 2050s and 2080 is the columns at the bottom there. So by the 2080s, in a high emissions scenario, we're looking at 9 extra storm events every winter period. Okay, that's 9 extra on top of what we're already having. But in the 2050s, we're looking at about, in a high emissions scenario, 4 days, 4 extra storm events. So remember, there's a storm event and then there's a swell. So the boat doesn't only not go on the storm event day, they don't go on the swell day either. So think back to those single elderly householders, and then think about the boat hasn't gone and the big lorry with all the food coming off it hasn't arrived. So please, next slide. And we've got our own climate map. It's called Our Climate Story, a citizen science map, and it's in English and Gaelic. Please, if you go on to the next slide. And we've had hundreds of people post their own experiences of the climate threats or opportunities to adapt in the community. And I encourage everybody to go on to Our Climate Story map And I think there'll be a link to it shortly. And if there isn't, you can see it on our website. So these are what some of the stats behind what people are saying. Predominantly, people have had the impacts on wildlife or the environment. That's at the top. But I wanted to pick up that it is noticeable that people are talking about reduced access to schools and shops, because the road's flooded. They can't get there. But equally, people are saying reduced access to food and water as well. Please, next slide. So, and people have said, where these are sort of linked to these issues, where people are saying about stocking food in advance in case of an emergency. That's fine, as long as you've got the freezer and you've got the electricity and you've got the money to fill that freezer. As I've pointed out, many folk don't have that. But equally, how do you deal with a situation where there's those extra storm events on top of the ones already? The answer is you start planning 3 months in advance. Well, if you're bedbound and you're over 75 and you have carers coming in, how do you do that? So that's about community facilities that are required to freeze and store this stuff to get out to those households. Please, next slide. So please go on to the next slide. I've just called this strategy in words because as ever, we have more strategies all over the place. And here's a diagram on the left-hand side that talks about the land use strategy and how it fits in with all these different strategies the Scottish Government have. And this was only published last week. And on there, if you look around the outer edge of that, you can see things like the Good Food Nation plan, vision for agriculture, biodiversity strategy. And then within that, you've got environment strategies, you've got planning frameworks, all these different things. None of those mean anything if you haven't got food on your plate and you've got a carer coming in to see you. So let's really bring these back to how do we make these things work and how do we get these functioning for people in our community. Please, next slide. And then you've got the Scotland Food and Drink Partnership, sustaining Scotland, supplying the world. Well, Fiona mentioned earlier on, didn't she, about the 2% issue. I don't care about supplying the world in many respects. I care about being able to feed vulnerable and frail people in our community. So I'm laying it on from a social policy perspective, and I'm sorry if I'm doing a sermon, but I kind of feel very passionate about this. We leave no one behind. It's why I moved to here, that community spirit and, love for one another. So there are these different strategies, and I've put the links into all of these. You'll get the slides sent through to you via email after the event anyway. You'll be able to view this on the YouTube channel as well if you want to stop and pick out any of these bits in more detail. But they talk about food security. They do talk about, please, can you just give us 2 minutes? Is that all right? Thank you. So they're going to, they've got this food drink published. They talk about supply chain security. That's really a critical part of what we're doing here. Melinda struggled getting venison and goose sent up from Storus to her charcuterie business in Stornoway because the boats were cancelled, between Berneray and Harris. And, that's these sort of issues. How do we move people around? How do we move food around? How do we move this to make this stuff work? Please go on to the next slide. I'm going to run over time, I know. So let's get doing. Next slide. We know that 77% of the population live on community land. We've got 6,000 crofts. We've got community land out at Hebrides. That's an excellent body that brings together all of the community land trusts. There, I would suggest, is one potential vehicle for driving this collaboration on food, given it's a land-based program. And I think that's something that could be looked at. The Paula's own economic development strategy really big this up. So the text on the left-hand side of that slide is all from the economic development strategy. And they make the point that communities are continuing to lead social and economic regeneration efforts, capitalising on the value of our natural and cultural resources. That's the economic development strategy of the Paula. I think community land can play a key role in all of this. Next slide, please. And then you've got people say, well, where are we going to get money to try and do all these things? Well, the lottery at the moment have got a food systems fund, where you can get up to 7 million quid for systemic change. Well, feeding a community kind of is systemic change. And I just, think that somebody, maybe Community Land out of Hebrides, maybe others, could look at that. And maybe one of the things that can come out of today is, I know that we don't get all the answers today, but we get a lot of questions today, but maybe we can start following up on some of these things afterwards. And Kirsty's alluded to that. The hub won't be able to do everything, but between the members, we really should be able to do more. Next slide, I think that's it. Okay. Well, agroecology has been talked about already, but that's one of the stipulations of that fund is you really have to take into account how the food is being produced. Next slide, please, and that probably is me. No, still more. I forgot even that I've done them. Can I just say that within the hub membership, 22% of the hub members are small businesses, many of which are linked to food. So let's utilise that. We've also got social enterprises galore. We've got community land trusts. We've got all of these different organisations. And there's got to be a way of us furthering collaboration to take these things forward. And if you're not a member of the Outer Hebrides Climate Hub, for those of you in the room, I have the membership forms here. For those of you online, please join, because you can come along to more things like this and participate. Next slide, please. And there we are. I've said join the Outer Hebrides Climate Hub. Next slide, please. That's all, folks. That's it. Thank you.
Wonderful, and okay, right. So, I'm not a farmer. I'm not a crofter. I'm not a food scientist. What I am is I'm a father, and I'm very, very keen on legacy. So, leaving something. And in terms of legacy, the only way we're going to create one is to do it collaboratively. So I want to leave it better than I found it, essentially, and I like a challenge. So this is where we are with it. So what I have found that going it alone doesn't work. And over the last 16, 17 years of solving problems and helping set up direct sales supply chains for meat processors, I'm just going to take you through where we found success. Okay, so could I have the next slide, please? Perfect. Okay, so why small producers struggle to scale? Well, essentially the first thing is cost. Costs you a lot of money. So the capex can be a big struggling point or a big problem. The other bit's labour inefficiency. So famous Scotsman back in the 18th century, a guy called Adam Smith, coined, I think it was organised labour. Okay. Well, essentially, he coined that phrase, but we've been doing it for about the last 2 million years in the form of collaborating. You can appreciate it's pretty difficult to bring down a mammoth on your own, and also there's an awful lot of meat. So the most efficient place to keep your spare meat is in your friend's belly. Okay? So we have been collaborating for quite some time. Okay, so working together, you get the job done quicker. Essentially, is what it is now. No headspace. If you're working inefficiently, the chances are you're not going to have any thinking time. There's all sorts of things that are outside of the business that are going to come up. Tiles are blown off the roof. You've got to get sheet back in. Whatever it is, there's always something. And if you're not working efficiently enough, this just impacts the whole of that problem. And the other thing is you're very much out on your own. One out of the blue disaster and you can be on your backside. Can be equipment going pop that you've not insured. It can be bad harvest. We had Sarah talking about that 60% loss in those lands. There's zero resilience. Now, can I have the next slide, please? Now, this is the power of collective working, but working together. So we would recommend community-owned facilities here. So what that does is it actually spreads all of that capital cost, reduces any sort of financial risk. You're all in it together. You've got no single producer carrying the whole of that financial burden, which is key with this. The risk's distributed. It isn't on that. It isn't on that single person. Now, from spending an awful lot of years on food processing facility shop floors, I can tell you that if you've not got your finger out and worked together, you'd be there for an awfully long, miserable day. So by organising labour, finding the people that are better at one particular element of it, I liken it to a bit of a sports team. You know, I don't want Finn Russell clearing out at a rock. I want him in the backfield making the decisions, you know, and I don't want my prop forwards kicking for goal either. It's just how it is. What they do, however, is they respect one another's skills and see how they benefit the bigger picture and the whole of the team. What organised labour does give you is thinking time. So you're going to get in front of the job. You're going to get on top of it. It gives you time to think. But we've got a saying in South Yorkshire, where I've spent a bit of time, 2 heads are better than 1, even if they're sheep heads. Right? Okay. So you get a problem come up and there are 12 of you involved. There are 12 potential solutions for that problem. At least one of them is going to be good. Potentially another one's going to be even better than the original idea you had. So all of that together, there's a lot of benefits to this. Now, next slide, please. So when we are talking about collaboration, we're talking about collaboration in the form of funding here. So the thing that has made a lot of the English projects work is this. This is FIPL funding. This is farming in protected landscapes. And I don't think it gets up as far as this, sadly. Now, what that covers are areas of outstanding natural beauty, essentially, or protected areas within England. The funds are available for capital and for training at the same time, which is great. And they're designed essentially for people that are farming in an agroecological fashion. So you could say it's the commercialisation of ethical meat production. We would typically see the livestock from an agroecological system as a byproduct, not a cash crop. So combining that with some sort of mixed rotational agroecological farming system, the volume that we produce. Is
that what's his name talking?
Sorry.
Okay. Guy from Penna Harris that does the food and that does the.
Right, lovely. Okay.
Sorry about that. Not sure what happened. Just continue.
We can hook up later, but thank you. Okay, right. So yeah, so FIPL funding has been a bit of a game changer, you know, for us. And without that, it would have been really, really difficult for us to be able to get a lot of these projects off of the ground. So I'm just going to talk about a few working examples of collaboration now. So working examples. So there you go. You'll forgive the photography there. As I said, IT is not my primary skill set. But there we go. So this is the Game Changers Foundation. So this is based down in West Berkshire. Now, I like a challenge. And if possible, I like to try and solve things all together. So the efficiency extends into problem solving as well. So we have a problem, explosion in the deer population of fallow deer in this particular area in West Berkshire. And not much to do with it, essentially. No real supply chain for it. The game dealers aren't paying an awful lot of money for it. The other thing that we're lacking as well is we've got a huge skill shortage in the sector. So in abattoirs and with butchery as well, massive skill shortage in the sector. And there is an issue in the area as well. So a lot like, you know, parts of more affluent parts of the UK, we've got very affluent shops living cheap by jar with a lot of food banks, which isn't good. So we needed to offer some affordable, nutrient-dense form of protein to the local community, which is what we've done. So Game Changers, essentially, we borrowed a mothballed meat processing unit on the Sheepdrove estate, which is an organic processing form of meat processing facility. We set that up. We were taking venison at cost price from stalkers. We were offering fully funded training places to hospitality students from Swindon College. So a lovely area, but not all that wealthy. Now, West Berkshire College and Swindon College were struggling with their budget. They couldn't afford meat to train their students on. So we thought we'd kind of try and kill two birds with one stone. Oh dear. So as we were training the students, and the students were breaking down the carcasses and turning them into various different products, providing the labour, what we were able to do was to take some of that meat, turn them into meat boxes. That's what that top image is there. Turn them into meat boxes, affordable meat boxes, and sell them into the community. Okay, so thereby helping with that bit. Now, what we also do as well is we also produce the venison salami and venison prosciutto down there as well, because it is a product that does carry a much better margin, which is the first thing. Now, the local community don't buy it. It isn't to their taste. And again, the retail price is rather high. But what we do is we just fleece people in Oxford at farmers markets, people with plenty of money, which is great. And I'll openly say that. But what that does, it helps give more of a commercial element to this. It makes it a viable thing. So all the students are making the salami, that gets sold at a higher retail price. The money comes back into the organisation again and helps further fund further training places. So initially, a lot of the training places were fully funded, but the cost of the trainer coming in was funded by FIPL. In the next years to come, we are hoping that the Game Changers organisation itself will be able to fully fund the training places. We're also hoping that we can get to a point where we can train, or we can retain some of these students and create what we call a the trainer situation. So we would train senior members of staff then to further train on, and the whole thing becomes self-sustaining. But without FIPL, this wouldn't have been possible. If I could have the next slide, please. So we're extending further than just meat processing here. So we were talking earlier on about the importance of nutrition. Okay, so we're going into schools and colleges. We are ensuring that students know about food provenance, how it's reared, how it's butchered, the nutritional importance of that entering the food chain, and so on. We're also looking to extend now into funded and subsidised workshop places for farmers in the area. So we're now going to look at domesticated livestock using exactly the same model. And then the idea being that we can then potentially develop a custom cut-up service using the labour from students to reduce the processing costs for primary producers that want to sell their meat back into the community. So again, the more time that we can expose students to, the more repetition of function and skill, the quicker they become skilled, and therefore the quicker we fill the skill shortages within the sector. The next slide, please. Okay, right. Okay, you might recognise this one. Okay, this is local. This is a little bit closer to home. In fact, just down the road here. So this is Melinda and Brian's business. This is Game Changer. No, it's not. It's Hebrides Charcuterie.
Game Changer's rubbish.
Yeah.
Bread is the best.
Dreadful. Yeah.
Start from that.
This is the stuff. So Hebrides Charcuterie. So in terms of collaboration, brilliant. You know, you've got a deer problem on the island. You've also got a goose problem on the island, which is where we are with it. So we've got this reciprocal relationship here. So Hebrides Charcuterie rely on the venison and the goose in the area to be able to make a lot of their products, and the whole of the estate and the whole of the islands need the population controlled. What we do need to do here is we do need to build better supply chains in the shape of facilities, which the last couple of days we've had some meetings with the Golston estate on doing that exact thing. But Hebridean charcuterie wouldn't be able to exist without some form of venison processing and some form of stalking and goose control on the island. So another example there of collaboration. I'll take you to the next. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so this is another form of collaboration. So this is the farmer's larder. So that image on the far left is a frozen meat vending machine. Okay, now that frozen meat vending machine was £15,000, or it is £15,000. Now, Fipple paid for 40% of that. The remaining 60% of that was split between 6 farmers that are supplying the meat into that machine. So rather than having 6 farmers all struggling to find 60% of £15,000 and then struggling to have a regular supply of meat then to put into that, we've decided to share the burden. So less of a financial risk there. And, you know, if I've learned anything from the guys in the Yorkshire Dales, they don't need all the ducks in a row. If half of them are in a row and it's worth the punt, they'll have a go, you know. But I think particularly with the frozen meat vending machine, we're hoping that the whole of this project then extends into various different phases. So we're hoping demand increases to a point at which we can have a pop-up farmers market, from there a bricks and mortar site, and then from there a processing facility and an academy and so on. It's actually situated just off the A65, just outside of a town called Settle. Now, the A65 is the main tourist route from Skipton right the way up to the Lake District. So the Courtyard Dairy, Andy Swinscoe is a cheese producer. He produces cheese from his own regeneratively farmed pasture-fed herd, but also champions cheeses from all around the UK as well. And this sort of bit of an opportunity there to increase his offering and make himself more of an attractive site. So he's working in collaboration with a sourdough pizza restaurant, which is on site now, a biodynamic wine producer, and dairy vending machines in there for things like raw milk, etc. The next phase is introducing meat in, but rather than gamble and put a bid in for a £2 million all singing, all dancing facility, we prefer to do this in these phased sections. Okay. Now the next one I haven't visited, and I haven't had any. Next slide, please. Okay, cool. The next one I haven't visited, but I've been aware of. This is the Dunes Larder, okay, on Uist. So again, as far as I'm aware, a community-owned food hub on Uist that's been set up here. So again, accessibility is key there. The advantage here as well, I think this system works a little bit differently, but essentially, if you're running vending machines, there isn't always the need for you to have paid staff on there all of the time. So it does make the running costs a little bit more achievable. But what it also does, in the form of a shared facility, it also allows for advertising of other producers' produce within the area as well, all under one roof. Okay, yeah. So there are case studies out there, and there are examples. They're all slightly different, but the one thing that they do have in common is it isn't a single individual on their own. They are pooling labour and resources together in order to get these things to work. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so what we'd like to make, well, what I've seen an opportunity, I think, looking from the outside, particularly what you've got here on the islands, there is the opportunity here to do an awful lot of things. So the first thing largely. I think for me, we were talking about priorities. Are we going to be producing products, highly desirable products to sell off of the islands? Or are we going to focus on feeding our own population? Well, I think we can do both, but I would rather do the latter before the former. Okay, so we've seen that there is demand for air dried and cured meat products, fermented meat products in the form of charcuterie products. We've seen that. There is a tradition for smoked products, smoked fish and so on here. Looking at John's lovely presentation first off today, we are doing vegetables here, or you are doing vegetables. I'm using the we. Have I moved in yet? No. I have here. Vegetables here. Now, frozen produce is also key as well. So frozen produce, I think people understand the importance of freezing now. So particularly in meat sales as well, it makes it a lot more convenient. But also if you have a real nutrient dense product, it does help keep those nutrients in place, particularly if you are blast freezing anyway. It just makes products an awful lot easier to handle in the form of things like venison. Say if you're having a cull and it is seasonal, it does give you the opportunity to process all in one go and then have some sort of a controlled release of volumes of product throughout the year, so that you don't have feast and famine periods. Confit and potted meats, okay, here, or rillette. Sorry, it's not potted meat, it's rillette. I don't make potted meat anymore. Rillette's probably another £20 a kilo, and I can fleece wealthy tourists a bit more. So rillette, okay, with that one. So, you know, whether it's goose legs or whether it's venison shank or whatever it is, you know, essentially cooking in a fat that's been rendered. Could have been some fantastic pork fat that's been rendered from an agroecologically reared pig. Fantastic to get to a point. We've got an incredible product there. Canned and shelf stable. Well, again, you know, we overlook canning, don't we? I think as well. And if you look on the continent, particularly in that Basque region of Spain, we were just looking in a deli down on the front. What was it called? Right? The Good Food Boutique. There's some fantastic northern Spanish tinned fish there, but it's £150 a kilo is the equivalent. Yet we're exporting stuff. We're exporting stuff in. So, but again, canning's a great form of preservation. I'd love to think in years to come that you guys here are going to be sending out pots of pate and rillette and incredible tinned fish to people living on their own on the islands here, and they're going to be having a fraction of the cost of some of the landed gentry on the mainland. I'd love that. I'd love that. So, but in terms of resilience as well, freezing. If you've got a frozen stock of food to feed the local community, so much the better. Canned and shelf stable product, again, if you've got a stockpile of that here, you don't need refrigeration for that. And when you look at particularly air dry meats and things like prosciuttos, you know, Belinda and Brian have been bright enough to go, okay, actually there was a tradition of this that came over on Viking boats and ships, and we would traditionally do that here. It's just a contemporary version of that now. It's been rebranded and remarketed for people with should we call them Epicureans? Yeah, so a little bit more desirable. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so a proposal. Okay, so you know, depending on where we go from here, I'd love to think that you guys can pick up what we've put down over the last couple of days. Okay, but a feasibility study is always the good way to go. I know people start to roll their eyes a little bit, but it depends who you are selecting to do your feasibility study. I would suggest that when you're picking somebody, they do have a background in physical food production. It does help. Okay, so it is going to be finding the suitable location for the small scale community processing units. In my opinion, what I think you would benefit from here is, I'm going to I'm going to park the abattoir thing for now because it's quite a contentious issue. However, you need one of them. I think we all recognise that. But what I would like to see for you is some sort of communal market hall with almost concessions where individuals can come and bring their produce and sell from. It's almost like an indoor market. I'm seeing street food on the harbour and shellfish and goodness knows what else here. And I think, from what I understand, investment in the deep sea harbour here to bring cruise ships in. What an incredible excursion for those guys to come into, and then popping up and doing some preservation courses, maybe somewhere else on the island, experiential for them as well. So sort of creating a little bit like what they have in the Lofoten Islands up in Norway. So we can both feed the community from tourist money, but then we can also feed the community from the food that we physically produce on the islands. I know I've run over and I apologise, but there's a lot to cram in there. But there you go. Thank you very much. A bit of food for thought.